Imagine starting your day like Link. His alarm goes off, a signal to start the day. He grabs his phone to turn it off and without realizing, spends the next hour reading webtoons in bed. What a treat this early in the morning. When reality seeps back in, Link rolls out of bed, faced with many decisions. Should he eat breakfast, maybe go for a run, or perhaps start studying? Too many choices, no clear routine. His habits are level 1. Decision fatigue sets in and my guy starts yet another day feeling behind. Gannon's habits are level 100. The sound of his alarm is the cue that initiates his morning routine. Without a second thought, he makes his bed. Look at that. Perfection. The first win of the day. A small reward to kick off his routine. This is followed by doing 100 push-ups, drinking a gallon of water, and meditating at the top of a mountain, basking in sunlight and glory. His habits are on autopilot, not by sheer willpower, but by strategic design. Hey, it's Mike. Welcome back to Habit Quest. Today we're talking about how to design a strong habit. So the 3 components of a habit, according to Wendy Wood, one of the world's leading experts on habit science, are cue, routine, and reward. And I've used this framework to build multiple long-lasting habits in my life. It's how I've managed to build a business, grow this YouTube channel, and publish a book while working as a doctor. And it sounds like a lot of things, but if you boil them all down, it's just been me sticking to these tiny little habits and staying consistent for the past 4 to 5 years. Building a business just started with me listening to business podcasts and audiobooks whenever I drove to work. Growing a YouTube channel was just posting videos regularly. Record, edit, repeat. Publishing a book was just a daily habit of writing a couple hundred words in the morning while drinking my coffee. And becoming a doctor was really fundamentally getting in a habit of routine, focused study sessions. I wouldn't say that I'm the smartest guy by any means, but I did build strong habits. So the cue, routine, reward are the 3 components of a habit. Think back to the story about Link and Gannon. They both have an alarm clock to trigger or cue them to start their habit. Gannon's habit was his structured morning routine, which was reinforced by the reward of feeling accomplishment and productive. On the other hand, Link didn't have an intentional routine, so his habit ended up being scrolling on webtoons in bed, which was reinforced by the reward of all the dopamine hits from all the scrolling. So notice that a reward doesn't always have to be a treat like sweets or candy or something. It's more about invoking feel-good chemicals in your brain to reinforce the habit, which candy can do, but there are other ways that don't rely on sugar. So if we want to build or break habits, we want to try and address this cue, routine, reward cycle. I like to think of these as 3 different levers that you can pull on to increase the strength of your habit. Imagine the strength of your habit lying on a spectrum. A strong habit is something that you can do without really thinking about it. When the cue happens, you just do it automatically. But once you've automated a habit into your life, then you can start to expand on it and build on the habit. But most people struggle with the initial phase of just being able to automate the habit into their lives. And the time it takes to automate a habit varies. You may have heard that it takes 21 days to build a habit, which is false. Studies suggest that it can take anywhere from 18 to 254 days, which just means that it varies from person to person and it depends on the habit itself. But to automate a habit, we can look at cue, routine, and reward, each of which also lie on the spectrum. Once I understood how to think about these 3 components on a spectrum, I was able to start designing my habits around this framework. So let's look at each of these in more detail. So the first component of a habit is the cue. This is what triggers you to do the habit. When we flush the toilet, that's a cue for us to wash our hands. When we get into a car, that's a cue for us to put on our seatbelt. So the science says that we can manipulate the cues based on its context. And the context of a cue can be a lot of things. It can be external, like the location you're in, the people you're around, or the time of day. Like I have a habit of drinking coffee in the mornings. The context can also be internal, like being in a particular emotional state. Like I have a habit of pulling out my phone whenever I feel bored. Context design is how I was able to begin to work on a weak habit. Because once a habit becomes really strong and automated, it becomes more context independent, meaning that our brains just automatically do the habit regardless of context. So think about one of the strongest habits we have, like brushing our teeth. It doesn't matter if we wake up early or we wake up late, if we're in a different country, or even how tired we feel. We always somehow make time to brush our teeth. We're all the way on this end of the spectrum where the context no longer matters that much because it's already been automated. On the other hand, if the habit is weak, we want to try and change the context to help the habit automate. What the context is doing is removing friction for us to actually do the thing. So an example of this is when I was building a habit of reading more and watching less TV. It used to be that when I'd sit down on the couch, that was a cue for me to reach for the remote and turn on the TV. So what I did was to change the context of the cue. I removed the TV remote from sight and instead I put a tablet where the remote used to be. And on the tablet, I would have articles and ebooks to read. So I changed the cue of sitting down on the couch, shifting it from triggering the remote to triggering the tablet. And I'll admit that it worked for a little bit, but it wasn't enough to fully build the habit because I was only addressing the cue. That's one component of the habit loop. So let's move on to the next one. The second component is routine. The routine is the exact sequence of actions that you do after being triggered by the cue. Some routines are just one quick action, like get in the car, put on seatbelt. That's easy. But other routines are much longer. Like the habit of going to the gym involves getting dressed, physically going to the gym, which might involve driving. Then once you get to the gym, there are hundreds of exercises to choose from. So if you don't have a structured routine when you're starting out, you're not going to stick with it. It's the same thing with the habit of studying. I used to struggle so badly with studying because I didn't realize that the habit involves a lengthy routine. You gotta find a place to sit, preferably a quiet place that's conducive for focus. Then you have so many classes, so many lectures. You gotta know what to study and when, how long should you study for. Plus there are dozens of study techniques that you can choose from. So when I was starting out, every study session was a struggle because I didn't have a routine. But over time, as I started to build habits and systems around my studying, it just became automatic. This is why in our Study Quest course, we stress the idea of having a study routine and system. So when you're studying, you want to be using your brain to learn and think about the information that you're actually learning and allow the habit side of your brain to take over and automate the tedious parts of studying. So the routine component also lies on a spectrum, and this spectrum is variability. When we're first starting out with a weak habit, we want almost zero variability. We want every repetition to be almost exactly the same so that our brains can imprint those procedures and patterns. But as our habit gets stronger, we can start to expand on it and change the variability to make it more flexible and improve our skill around it. You gotta learn to walk before you can run. So let's look again at my reading habit. I've already changed the cue to trigger me picking up my tablet instead of picking up my remote. But once I picked up my tablet, I didn't have a set routine. I'd open it and get bombarded with all these decisions I had to make. Should I read my Kindle? Should I read articles, newsletters? Should I read a business book? Should I read fiction? And then there's all these apps to choose from. And by that time, decision fatigue would start to set in and I would find myself just browsing the internet or Reddit after a couple of minutes of not having read anything. So to streamline my decision-making process and make reading a strict routine every time, I removed everything from the home screen so that when I opened my tablet, it would just be 1 or 2 apps to click on. And for a long time, this app was short form. And this isn't sponsored or anything, but I've always enjoyed how insightful their summaries were. And so if a summary intrigued me enough, then I would go and check out the entire book. And then I would have the Kindle app there to read the book. So there was no TikTok or YouTube or Reddit to distract me from my habit. So once I've done that, the habit started to run a little smoother. But as we know, there's one more piece to the puzzle. And that third component is reward. The point of a reward is to give you positive feedback in doing the habit so that you're more likely to do it again the next time. When we do something that triggers the release of dopamine and other feel-good chemicals in our brain, we associate that enjoyment with what we're doing. So a good example is just eating chocolate, right? It tastes good, it releases all sorts of good feelings, so we enjoy eating chocolate. When we plot reward on the habit strength spectrum, we see that the big factor here is the source of enjoyment. Where is the enjoyment coming from? Ultimately, when we automate the habit and begin to expand on it, the source of enjoyment comes from doing the habit itself. If you put me in a job that I don't really like, but you pay me a lot of money for doing the job, then yeah, I'll do it because I enjoy getting money. But if you remove money from the equation, then I won't want to do that job anymore because I'm not getting any enjoyment out of the job itself. But looking at this another way, I'll play video games and watch movies all day, and you don't have to pay me anything to do that. In fact, I'll pay to buy the video games. So we all understand the power of enjoyment, but how do we design that into our habit? Well, the important thing is that the brain needs to associate the habit with enjoyment. Let's look back at my reading habit. If I reward my reading habit by going to watch a movie on the weekend, then sure, that's a reward, but it's not really tying the enjoyment to the habit because it's happening so much later. What I could do is reward myself to a movie immediately after I read, and that could potentially work, but watching a movie every night is kind of overkill. Instead, I could give myself some chocolate. It's not as epic as a movie, but I like chocolate. It feels good. I could also eat chocolate while I'm reading, and that's even better because now I'm feeling good while I'm doing the habit. And in fact, that's exactly what I did, except it wasn't with chocolate. When I sat down to read, I'd either have a bowl of fruit or a beverage that I really enjoyed. But my point is, when the habit was weak, my enjoyment came from the treats. But over time, as the habit became more automatic, my enjoyment shifted down the spectrum and I started to get more enjoyment from the habit itself. I enjoyed the feeling of being productive, and I took pride in my identity as someone who just valued learning. Okay, now it's your turn. So the habit loop of cue, routine, reward. Think about the habit you're trying to build, right? And dissect it down to these three components. Is your cue frictionless? If not, change the context around it to reduce the friction of you doing the habit. Is your routine crystal clear? If not, come up with a routine that's repeatable in the exact same way every time. And is your reward associating enjoyment with the habit? Pause the video and think about this for a second. It should take less than a minute to design a decently thought out habit in your mind. So pause the video and do this now. And once you've designed your habit, put it in the comments below and share it with the rest of the academy. I'll be going through personally and taking a look at as many as I can. In the next Habit Quest videos, we'll be diving deeper into each of these phases because there's just so much that we didn't cover. But I'm gonna do my best to break down my journey into actionable steps. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.